To this preview for Stave 2 of A Christmas Carol, which I entitled Conversion Begins. And again, these are not super comprehensive previews. I teach Christmas Carol as a hopefully an introduction to this kind of novel to my freshmen, but most of all, I tried to glean from Dickens some creative writing tools that my students can use in their own writing. So we'll be working on that together as well. In terms of a quick summary of Stave 2, and I'm using the Penguin Classics edition here. Interestingly, the chapter begins again with Scrooge being confused. And secondly, we meet the ghost of Christmas past. Scrooge, in his journeys into his past, first sees his boyhood self alone at school, and that's an interesting passage. We see a slightly older Scrooge with his sister, sort of rescuing him from this oppressive school. We see him as a slightly older, maybe upper teenager, early 20s gentleman, being apprenticed at Fezziwig's, and that's a great scene. We see sort of the first moment of overt sort of challenge and tragedy, I would say, with his fiancée breaking up with him for some really interesting reasons. And then we end with the ghost showing him what happened to that fiancée later in her life. And the chapter predictably ends with Scrooge returning to his own bed. So I start these previews with a question inspired by the chapter. And I don't know, I never noticed this. I've read this book, I don't know, 15 or 20 times. And I never noticed this until yesterday when I was rereading Stave 2, that chapter 1 begins with the narrator really for a really long time making sure that we, the reader, know that Marley is dead. And it's said in so many different imaginative ways using literary allusions and imagery. So the first stanza seems to have some concern about the reality of Marley's death and whether one would believe it. And the second stave features Scrooge in bed, not sure about the time passing, trying to remember what Marley said about the visitation of the ghosts. And, the chapter speculates, was it a dream or not? And I guess my question is, why do the first two staves begin worrying about what is real? And just thinking about that, I think it's an example of the book sort of addressing what it knows the reader would wonder about. If you're really entering into this book and you're looking to suspend your disbelief, it's asking you to believe in ghosts, and it's asking you to believe in some really difficult to believe things. So at least it's addressing things that aren't automatically, scientifically provable or believable, and it's addressing them. And it's addressing the fact that they're challenges. And we have characters inside the books wrestling with these things, and I think we too wrestle with them as well. So one of my favorite passages, and again, it really stood out this time through, particularly in relationship to Stave 1, that Stave 1 largely is, in the counting house particularly, and in Scrooge's own home, is about paucity. It's about a lack of things and a bareness. And Scrooge lives, obviously, the life he lives. But we get some moments in Stave 2 that are just so wildly different. And I think that's really important. So this is just an example of getting ready for a party. And I think, Fezziwig does similar work than the older Scrooge does. He just manages his office wildly differently. And this is a paragraph that without Dickens ever having to explain the distinctions between Fezziwig and Scrooge as bosses, he just sort of demonstrates it with this list. It's a list paragraph. It's a list of all the sounds and characters. And it seems like it's a universe where everybody that could be there is there celebrating. So here's the passage that I want to focus on. In came a fiddler with a music book and went up to the lofty desk and made an orchestra of it, and tuned like 50 stomach aches. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast substantial smile. In came the 3 Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable. In came the 6 young followers whose hearts they broke. In came all the young men and women employed in the business. That's a simple sentence, but everybody employed was invited. I don't think that's accidentally mentioned. In came the housemaid with her cousin, the baker. So the hired help and their relatives are invited. In came the cook with her brother's particular friend, the milkman. In came the boy from over the way who was suspected of not having board enough from his master. So kids who need some food who live nearby are welcome. Trying to hide himself behind the girl from the next door but one who was proved to have had her ears pulled by her mistress. In they all came, one after another, some shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling. In they all came, anyhow and everyhow. Away they all went, 20 couple at once, hands half round and back again the other way, down the middle, up again, round and round in various stages of affectionate grouping. Old top couple always turning up in the wrong place, new top couple starting off again. So he's narrating a dance, right? As soon as they got there, all top couples at last, and not a bottom one to help them. When this result was brought about, old Fezziwig clapped his hands to stop the dance, cried out, "Well done!" and the fiddler plunged his hot face into a pot of porter, especially provided for that purpose. But scorning rest, upon his reappearance, he instantly began again, though there were no dancers yet, as if the other fiddler had been carried home exhausted on a shutter, and he were a brand new man resolved to beat him out of sight or perish. There were more dances, and there were more forfeits, and more dances, and there was cake, and negus, and there was a great piece of cold roast, and a great piece of cold boiled, and there were mince pies, and plenty of beer. But the great effect of the evening came after the roast and boiled, when the fiddler, an artful dog, mind, the sort of man who knew his business better than you or I could have told it him, struck up Sir Roger de Coverley. Then old Fezziwig stood out to dance with Mrs. Fezziwig. Top couple, too, with a good stiff piece of work cut out for them, 3 or 4 and 20 pair of partners, and people who were not to be trifled with, people who would dance and had no notion of walking. But if they had been twice as many, 4 times, old Fezziwig would have been a match for them, and so would Mrs. Fezziwig. As to her, she was worthy to be his partner in every sense of the term. If that's not high praise, tell me higher, and I'll use it. A positive light appeared to issue from Fezziwig's calves. They shone in every part of the dance like moons. You couldn't have predicted at any given time what would have become of them next, and when old Fezziwig and Mrs. Fezziwig had gone all through the dance, advance and retire both hands to your partner, bow and curtsy, corkscrew, thread the needle, and back again to your place, Fezziwig cut so deftly that he appeared to wink with his legs, and came upon his feet again without a stagger. I think this is a really important passage. It creates such a stark difference. So yes, Scrooge, obviously, the overt point of this is Scrooge as an older man realizes that he was brought up under a boss who was so qualitatively different than he is to Cratchit. We get that reading this just for the first time. But just the opulence and the openness. This is one of those holiday environments where everybody's welcome. You get the sense that anybody could have come in and eaten and had something to drink and had a dance and would have been embraced. And it's just the overwhelming sense. So we get the list of people who were invited and what they're doing. And then this largely focuses on Fezziwigs themselves amidst their own party. And I'd like to say, as someone who's hosted a lot of holiday parties, it isn't easy to be joyful sometimes at a party you're hosting. So not only is he overtly generous, but he also is joyful even amidst pressure, even amidst the pressure of hosting a party. It's a particular gift. My aunt was great at hosting parties. My mother was great at hosting parties, my grandmother. And you never got the sense that they were burdened by it. That's easy to do when you're having a lot of people over. So Fezziwig is not only generous in his behavior, but he's joyful in his generosity. So those are 2 very stark differences with Scrooge, and Scrooge is watching. Like this is like a Shakespearean play within a play where we have to remember that as these things are unfolding, we're watching Scrooge watch these moments. So I always include a curious vocabulary word. On page 61, Dickens uses one of his favorite adjectives. He uses this adjective a lot in all of his novels, capacious. It means ample and roomy, but it also has the connotation of generous. there being more than enough. And Fezziwig's waistcoat here is seen as capacious, largely because he's chubby, but also it's a reflection on who he is, that around him there is always more than enough for everyone. So again, it's one of those vocabulary words that echoes in multiple ways throughout the novel. Okay, my creative writing exercise for my students for this chapter is a curious chapter that deals with things that are missing at a given moment in Stave 2. So, think about your personal narrative. Sorry if this hits home for any of you. Pause during a moment in your holiday memory, a moment that you think maybe you need to make come alive a little bit more. So you can pause the video, go to your moment we started last time, and think about a moment where you want to hit the pause button and you want to just maybe think and imagine. Okay, so mine is when we're sitting at the breakfast table after we open presents. So very simple sentence. We slumped into our chairs at the kitchen table, ready to eat our scrambled eggs and bacon. So again, pause and just say what's happening in a literal sentence. Okay, 2. And you can feel free to pause these as you need to, right? Name an echo of something at this moment that you do not hear in the space you're in. So you're sitting in this moment. What do you not hear? Weird question. Most of us don't think, if we're writing a descriptive paragraph, to mention things that aren't heard, that aren't seen, that aren't said. Dickens includes everything. So here's mine. The peculiar silence of our dining room was a silence palpable as sound itself, the sound of everything absent from our traditional Christmas morning, the echo of my father's terrible jokes, my mother's boisterous laughter, and my brother's and my excitement over our favorite toys. Instead, there was only bacon sizzling in the pan and our futile attempts to remain upright at the table. Okay, so make sure you have a sentence or two there. Next, name something in the house that possibly might be going on that you don't hear. So again, Dickens' attention everywhere, right? Again, you can pause. Our dog Buttons, usually excited to be a part of the holiday festivities, was nowhere to be found. His unheard snores in an upstairs room, yet another curious absence this dark Christmas morning. Okay. But wait, there's more. I love this meme, by the way. Lazy way to win at Christmas decorating. It's just Yoda destroying all the blow up figures that you don't want to blow up. I think it's brilliant. Name something outside the room and space that you're in that you don't hear. So not something in your general vicinity. So for me, I'm in my house, so it would be like, outside somewhere. So again, feel free to pause. Absent too were the Merry Christmas phone calls from relatives, the animalistic stomping up and down stairs, the kinesthetic trademark of youthful Christmas enthusiasm, and the hum of nearby car motors as our neighbors would normally be preparing to leave home and visit nearby relatives. Okay? Personify a nearby object. Dickens is big on this. Sometimes that things in Dickens are so important that they actually become people. Personify a nearby object or piece of nature that you do not hear making any sound right now. Even the trees outside stood frozen and still, as if they also were too tired to face the cold, dark Christmas morning. Sorry about the typo. Reflect on what it means for you at this moment in your story to not hear these things. What effect does it have on you? So again, pause this anytime you need to. I did not know how to respond to this unusual holiday lethargy and the silence that accompanied it, as if I walked on the stage of a play I had never rehearsed and for which the lines were utterly unfamiliar, and with only the tick-tocks of our kitchen clock keeping the time. So here's what I have. We slumped into our chairs at the kitchen table, ready to eat our scrambled eggs and bacon. The peculiar silence of our dining room was a silence palpable as sound itself, the sound of everything absent from our traditional Christmas morning, the echo of my father's terrible jokes, my mother's boisterous laughter, my brother's and my excitement over our favorite toys. Instead, there was only bacon sizzling in the pan, and our futile attempts to remain upright at the table. Even our dog Buttons, usually excited to be a part of the holiday festivities, was nowhere to be found. His unheard snores in an upstairs room, yet another curious absence this dark Christmas morning. Absent, too, were the Merry Christmas phone calls from relatives, the animalistic stomping up and down stairs, the kinesthetic trademark of youthful Christmas enthusiasm, and the hum of nearby car motors, as our neighbors would normally be preparing to leave home and visit nearby relatives. Even the trees outside stood frozen and still, as if they also were too tired to face the cold, dark Christmas morning. I did not know how to respond to this unusual holiday lethargy and the silence that accompanied it, as if I walked on the stage of a play I'd never rehearsed and for which the lines were utterly unfamiliar, with only the tick-tocks of our kitchen clock keeping the time. So I want to tell you that if you just told me to write a personal narrative essay remembering this Christmas morning, I only probably would have written the first sentence, that I probably wouldn't have considered all the things I wasn't hearing. And it's a really fascinating imaginative space that Dickens forces us into by doing this. So here's his paragraph. And this is what the boy Scrooge doesn't hear while he's sitting all by himself. Not a latent echo in the house, not a squeak and scuffle from the mice behind the paneling, not a drip from the half-thawed water-spout in the dull yard behind, not a sigh among the leafless boughs of one despondent poplar, not the idle swinging of an empty storehouse door, no, not a clicking in the fire, but fell upon the heart of Scrooge with a softening influence and gave a freer passage to his tears. He is so good. This business here, about not a sigh among the leafless boughs of a despondent poplar. There's so much information there. It's great. Anyway, I hope this is helpful. I hope it's fun writing creatively along with Dickens. It's a particular challenge, but I hope you're up to it. Have a good night and happy reading.